Hi Ecofictologists, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lovis and today I am delighted to introduce you to Mary Woodbury, who was kind enough to agree to do a little interview with me. Hi Mary.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. Many of you will recognize her name. She runs the amazing Dragonfly.eco site, which is just a fantastic resource for anybody wanting to know more about ecofiction as well as eco-literature and all kinds of related areas and genres. And now I'm just happy that she's here and talking to me.
Thank you for having me. I love your video show. I think it's a great additional voice to this genre, this whole field of literature, and you're really doing an excellent job. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so you recently celebrated 8 years of your website, Dragonfly.eco. That's a big milestone. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What inspired you to start the site in the first place?
I guess it was just, you know, from the time I was a little girl, I loved reading fiction that was set in the outdoors or brought in nature. You know, when I was smaller, I really loved reading the animal fables and fairy tales. So that just kind of stayed with me my whole life. And when I got to be an adult, I was kind of just wanting to do some kind of literary project. And I thought, why don't I just do something on, you know, novels that explore ecofiction and climate change, because I was actually writing one when I first came up with the site. And by the time I put it together, it was already published. And I was interested in what else was out there, for one. So the site started small. It was kind of a list of other novels in the similar vein as mine, but then it's just grown so much throughout the past 8 years.
Yeah, it's quite an extensive list now, quite an extensive database.
Yeah.
and a lot of author interviews, which are really fascinating to read. What you just published was a novella. It was called Birdsong, which you published under your pen name Clara Hume. Can you give us a brief kind of spoiler-free summary of what the book's all about?
Sure. It's about a young girl. She's done with high school and she wants to go to college, but she lives in a poor section of Chicago, and her mother had just died in the previous year, and she's just kind of at a limbo in her life. She lives with an alcoholic uncle, and she has a lot of dreams, but she just kind of paralyzed in her situation. And she wakes up one morning, you know, she goes to sleep and it's this cold Chicago night, and she wakes up and she's on this warm island. And, you know, I don't want to spoil it at all, but it's a young adult story about a woman who has dreams and she wants to figure out her life. She kind of does so with the help of the weird going on the island. She runs into some sirens, so there's some Greek mythology to it. And I played around with what I consider ecological weird fiction, which I hadn't tried before.
I've heard you mention the term before. I was going to ask.
I know, it's like trying, you know, a new food or something. Yeah.
Yeah, can you expand a bit on what ecological weird is?
I think it is what it sounds like it is. It's a weird fiction with a strong sense of ecological setting. I think for readers, weird fiction is a good way, especially if we're talking about ecological climate crises, to kind of symbolize what's going on in our real world, but do so in a weird fashion through plants and animals and such. And you know, but you look at our world is also weird. And we have a lot of weird, you know, species that we don't really understand completely, and who are just, you know, are amazing, like fungi and everything. So it's just another way to do some symbolism, like, which is what fiction is full of. And I think it works if you're if you're like me, you kind of like to have a psychological slow burn in a film or movie, and doesn't have to be jump scares, but it, you know, anything that really makes you think, and then you come back later and go, whoa, that was, I'm not saying that my novella is going to be that good, but some of the weird fiction that I've read has really affected me quite a bit.
So apart from it getting bigger and more popular and more people knowing about it, what other trends have you seen in this genre, this category of books over the years since you've been kind of compiling?
Yeah, I think outside of terminology, like genre terminology, which some people kind of like to box it up into one term, I tend to see like a bigger perspective. And I think part of that is just because ecofiction itself has kind of been defined as in two different ways. One is a genre on its own, and the other is like a composite subgenre, which can really just give impulse to all these other genres like science fiction, magical realism, you know, fantasy, romance, thriller, mystery, crime, detective. I mean, it's in every, you can find novels in every field. I kind of like that perspective the best, because I don't think that when we come to trying to define a label, a genre label for these novels, we always run into the possibility that we're going to go, oop, no, this book isn't, but this book is. And I just like the inclusivity of ecofiction. Well, I guess one of the trends is that it is a diverse field. And because of that, we do see not just one genre, but several genres. And what I have always kind of liked to see, and what I'm seeing more of probably in the last 2 or 3 years, is that in the beginning, it seemed like ecofiction was written, I would say not all, but dominantly white men from North America or Europe and maybe Australia. But now we're seeing that this field is diverse, as it should be. And more and more, you know, I'm looking around and seeing more and more from, you know, Indigenous people who have probably always written about it, but it just hasn't, like, it hasn't been in the media as much. And so it's harder to find people of color, people from other countries. And I think this trend is very important because, you know, I would say a lot of people from North America, I mean, I'm going to include myself in this, we write from privilege, like from a privileged surrounding. Like, we're not really seeing the brunt of climate change around us. We are concerned, we have every right to be concerned. We, you know, might be privileged, but we are compassionate, and that's good. I mean, we all should be kind of looking into this field as writers, if that's what interests us. And, but it's, you know, I mean, I think that we just do need as many voices as possible to kind of hold up Mother Earth and our concerns about what's happening in our world today. But to me, some of the most impactful fiction that I've read, period, is really from a place of pain, almost. I'm trying to find more and more literature like that, that's really born from someone who's kind of more on the front lines of climate change. Maybe they live in a place where they're a climate refugee, or, you know, they're working with people, or it's around them, or, you know, maybe their landscape has really been a lot more changed than like somebody like my landscape, which is changing. And I know that it is biologically and ecologically, but it's not so evident quite yet. And I just think for us to be able to read novels set in other places, people from other cultures, really will give us a perspective of a bigger perspective and a kind of a wholer viewpoint of what is going on around the world. I think Black Lives Matter really propelled even more so. You know, I know that your section on Black authors was awesome. I learned a lot from it, so thank
Oh,
you.
I'm glad.
Yeah. But I think that that has made people really even, I mean, Black Lives Matter has been around for a long time, but this past year, along with so many other things, like some terrible things happen, and we just constantly have to be reminded and open our eyes further and really promote Black authors, and not just Black authors, but, you know, people, all people of color, Indigenous voices. I think it's really important.
Absolutely. What do you think? I mean, ecofiction is growing, but what do you think needs to happen for it to kind of merge more into the mainstream? I probably wouldn't say that it's mainstream just yet.
Yeah. It's hard to say, like, if we're just talking about the term ecofiction, I think it's almost more of an academic term still than like a public relations type term or a marketing term. I'm not sure if it will ever get huge, and in a way that's kind of nice, because once things start getting big, there's a certain kind of commodification to that. And you know, but to me, ecofiction is not just the label, it's the actual stories, and they're not always called ecofiction. They might be called Afrofuturism or science fiction or whatever, but the stories themselves, if they're very strongly ecologically aware and, you know, don't cut out that crucial connection to our environment, and even possibly may be an advocacy story and raise, you know, concerns, hopefully not too preachy, because my survey showed we don't like that. You know, that turns people off. But yeah, I think we're already seeing these stories start becoming more and more mainstream. I mean, look at Jeff Vandermeer's, you know, Southern Reach trilogy was huge, and so has books been since. I think even he's doing a new one, Hummingbird Salamander, and I don't think it comes out till next year, but I read that it was optioned by somebody to become a series or a movie or something. I can't remember exactly. Yeah, but so they are becoming mainstream. It's just when people read them, they're definitely going to find out, if they go past just the movie or the book, and if they were reading and watching, they're like, whoa, this is maybe saying something about our natural world. But that doesn't mean they have to go, oh, hey, it's ecofiction,
No, that's true.
or, you know, anything like that. So to me, ecofiction is more the stories, and instead of genre labels. I don't think the label will get big, but I think the stories are already becoming more mainstream, because more people in our world are getting concerned about, you know, our crises on our planet. And it's good to see in stories about who we are.
I wondered what you think the difference is in impact of a book that just makes us love an animal or feel awe or in wonder for nature, and one that actually actively promotes the protection of that thing.
I think both are probably important. You know, then I had to think back, like, in my life, like, how did I feel, like, how did I ever get to this point that I feel like we should protect animals? And it wasn't because I grew up learning conservation so much. It's because I grew up reading stories about animals in need, or even plants like the giving tree, or animals like Bambi. And you kind of have this empathy and sympathy toward animals. And that's something that fiction does. It's another part of my survey, by the way. Empathy is like almost one of the most important things. And I think that even studies that I've read that are listed in that survey, show that when we read fiction and we relate to a story, you know, psychologically something's going on that helps us, enables more empathy within us if we're touched by the story. So in that sense, I think that those stories about animals, or could be trees or whatever, they nurture, you know, that empathy in us. And then we grow up, like, the next part of that is caring part is then wanting to protect. And so I think those stories are really important. As far as conservation, though, it's always interesting to read stories about, you know, people who maybe want to go off and work on a preserve of some kind. And there's some stories like that floating around, and they're really good. And it kind of also empowers you as an adult to realize it doesn't matter where you're at. Maybe your personal emotions or life isn't all that great, but you can always gain something by, you know, looking outside of your own tragedies or boring life or whatever. And, you know, maybe try doing something like that. And I think that's important too. So I think both stories can come at you. I just think that the most important stories have some element in them that reaches out to our hearts. And I think that that's like everybody I've ever talked to will come to that same conclusion. So maybe it's not so much the subject matter as much as it is just telling a wonderful story that people can relate to.
That's a really good point. What we have an emotional connection to, I suppose we have an immediate instinctual response to try and protect it. So
yeah,
having one, you know, having the conservation stories without creating any empathy probably doesn't achieve very much.
Right.
Actually, the only question I have left for you is to ask for some recommendations, which I know you must be just bursting with recommendations from your site. So lay it on us.
Yeah, I wrote some down. I probably should go look at those. I mean, I've read so many good books. It's hard for me to really recommend just a few. What I had written down is there's some books that I've actually gone, wow, and as opposed to, oh, that's good and thought-provoking. Some books that was just blown away by were Wu Ming-Yi's The Man with Compound Eye, Pitchaya Sudbanthad's Bangkok Wakes to Rain, Namwali Serpell's The Old Drift, Emmi Itäranta's Memory of Water, and one that I'm reading now that's just crazy is Christian Badness's Fauna, which is weird fiction, of course. But there's so many more beyond that. I think if you go to the site and kind of look at the interviews that I've done, the spotlights that I'm doing on authors, those are equal to some good recommendations, as well as the Medium articles that are going around the world in 80 books.
Well, that's all I have for you. So I guess all that's left is for me to thank you again for being here and for taking the time to talk to me. I've really enjoyed having you on Ecofictology.
Thank you. I'm honored, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And that's all from me. So I will see you next week, Ecofictologists.